Historically, after the treaties were made, the Crown had forms of the Indian Act already in the making before we made treaties with them. So the Indian Act changed the process in a major way. They set up land titles under the Indian Act that were titles vested in the Crown for the use and benefit of Indians. When we reserved that title by treaty making, with the sovereignty of our nations remaining intact in the title to those lands, those resources, those waters, and the jurisdiction for airspace. That's why we need our own inherent title to lands and resources. We need our own inherent title to water and jurisdiction for airspace. We have our own laws governing program, the environment and conservation of our lands and resources, waters and jurisdiction for airspace. All that is missing. Why aren't we doing it? We can't we can't continue to complain about what the province and the feds are doing and expect our leadership to do something when we have no laws mandating them to get their work done. We're enforcing our inherent rights and title, treaties and treaty rights, and our sovereignty of our governments. So when we move along in terms of that framework governing the Crown Indian Nations relations, I will do another video on that comprehensive recognition that's there today, governing the Crown Indian Nations relations, the sovereignty treaty relations, the nation-to-nation relations, the government-to-government relations, and our treaty inherent rights relations. And that will tie things together for you. But along with that, I will do another video on another form of code of silence that most people know nothing about wherever I've gone across Canada with non-Indians and Indians, knowing little about the doctrine of discovery that the empires implemented when they took over and stole our lands and resources. They don't know much about the 1493 Papal Bull that I'll be discussing with you, where the empires of the governments of the nations went to the Pope of the Catholic Church to validate their theft of our lands and resources from the original peoples of the world within their nations. And the Pope passed what they call the 1493 Papal Bull. And I'll cover that in some detail, because it applies today. Then came the 1830 detribalization policies, and I'll address that, followed by these empire colonial genocide policies, were then followed by the Canadian genocide policies. The 1947 plan to liquidate Canada's Indian problems within 25 years, the 69 White Paper policy, the 74-76 Native policy, and the 1980 Buffalo Jump. Those tie together 500 years of colonial policies being implemented today in 2024, not just by the governments of Saskatchewan, the provinces, or the federal government, but by our governments and our organizations and our communities. So I'll cover that in a special video on showing you how the colonial genocide policies are being implemented, and they form a major part of the code of silence that our people are not aware of, and we're implementing them. So that's been my agenda. And I've given you a lot of information now on our inherent sovereignty, our inherent rights by sector, our inherent title to lands, resources, water, and jurisdiction for airspace, how they're granted to our nations and peoples by the Creator, they come from nowhere else, and how we now have treaties through the national treaty-making powers of the governments of our nations and the treaty rights. So I also identified the form of implementation that we need to take to implement them. And that's recognized by UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But there's also the Organization of American States Declaration as well, that goes into some depth on the recognition of our inherent rights. Not so much treaties, but they are there as well. So that's the code of silence that I have mentioned and now identified with each of you if you're interested.